The Vrelian Empire had, over the course of 17 centuries, perfected exactly three things: bureaucracy, military protocol, and the art of being absolutely insufferable about both. Their assessment protocols were legendary across 47 star systems, not because they were particularly effective, but because they were so monumentally complicated that most species simply gave up and accepted Vrelian superiority rather than wade through the paperwork required to dispute it. Station Kepler 9 orbited a gas giant in the Tertius sector, a monument to Vrelian architectural philosophy, which could be summarized as, if it doesn't look intimidating enough to make lesser species reconsider their life choices, add more spikes. The station served as the Empire's premier military academy, churning out officers who could recite combat doctrine in their sleep and follow orders with the kind of precision that made clockwork look sloppy. The combat assessment chamber occupied the station's central hub, a vast circular arena surrounded by observation decks where instructors and visiting dignitaries could watch cadets prove their worth or, more entertainingly, fail spectacularly. The chamber's walls were lined with adaptive shielding that could simulate everything from zero gravity to hostile atmospheric conditions, though the Vrelians rarely bothered with such variables. Their assessment philosophy was simple. If you couldn't handle a standard environment, you had no business handling anything else. At the center of all this militaristic magnificence stood Chief Assessor Krelvax, a Vrelian whose chest held more commendations than a human junk drawer held batteries. His exoskeleton bore the deep purple hue that marked senior officers, and his primary sensory stalks swept the chamber with a kind of authoritative swivel that suggested he'd never encountered a problem he couldn't solve with proper protocol. The human arrives within the hour, announced Lieutenant Thexril, Krelvax's adjutant, whose own exoskeleton still carried the lighter violet of junior officers. The exchange program coordinator transmitted her files this morning. Krelvax's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or indigestion. With Vrelians, it was often difficult to tell. Another human. Wonderful. What makes the Terran Defense Initiative believe this one will perform any better than the previous three? The documentation suggests she possesses above-average reflexes for her species. So did the last one. He lasted approximately 4.3 seconds before the scanner bolt struck him in what humans call the solar plexus. He made a most undignified sound. The lieutenant's mandibles twitched. The medical bay reported he recovered within 20 minutes and requested to try again. Admirable persistence, deplorable performance. Krelvax pulled up the assessment records on his data tablet, scrolling through centuries of results with the satisfaction of someone reviewing a particularly successful stock portfolio. The scanner bolt assessment has maintained a 98.7% effectiveness rating across all registered species. The only failures occurred with the Zentari, who can phase shift through solid matter, and that incident with the crystalline collective, who technically don't have bodies to hit. And the humans? 3 attempts, 3 immediate failures. Their reaction times are adequate for primitive combat scenarios, but wholly insufficient for modern warfare. Their physical durability is questionable at best. Their tendency to question established protocol borders on pathological. Krelvax set down his tablet with the decisive click of someone making a final judgment. I expect today's assessment to conclude within 5 seconds, perhaps 6 if she's particularly quick at dodging. What Krelvax didn't know, what the entire Vrelian Empire didn't know really, was that humans had spent the last 10,000 years doing something that most civilized species had abandoned shortly after discovering faster-than-light travel. They'd continued hitting each other with progressively faster objects just to see what would happen. The human arrived 17 minutes ahead of schedule, which immediately marked her as suspicious. Vrelians arrived exactly on time. Early was just as much a violation of protocol as late. She stood perhaps 1.7 meters tall, which was laughably short by Vrelian standards, with the kind of compact build that suggested her species hadn't quite figured out proper nutrition. Her skin was a shade the Vrelian color spectrum registered as moderate brown, and her facial features held that peculiar asymmetry that made humans look like they'd been designed by a committee that couldn't agree on anything. Cadet Vexthor watched her enter the assessment chamber from his position in the observation deck, his sensory stalks tracking her movement with professional interest. He was the Academy's top-ranked cadet, destined for fleet command, and he'd volunteered to conduct today's assessment specifically because his previous firing record was flawless. 43 cadets tested, 43 successful bolt strikes, 0 margin of error. The human wore the standard assessment suit, a form-fitting garment designed to register impact force and location. She looked around the chamber with what Vexthor's cultural database labeled as casual interest, the kind of expression one might wear while deciding which flavor of nutrient paste to select for lunch. Cadet. Krelvax consulted his tablet, stumbling over the pronunciation Rios, Rias, Reeves, the human said, her voice carrying that flat, unimpressed quality that Vexthor had learned to associate with her species. Maya Reeves. Just Reeves is fine. Very well, Reeves. You have been briefed on assessment protocols? Yep. Someone shoots something at me. I'm supposed to dodge it. Combat readiness evaluation. Standard military posturing. Got it. Krelvax's sensory stalks stiffened at the casual dismissal of 17 centuries of military tradition. The scanner bolt is not something, Cadet. It is a sophisticated weapon system that locks onto thermal signatures, adjusts its trajectory in real time, and accelerates to velocities that would... So, it's a smart bullet. It is considerably more advanced than... Smart bullet that can turn corners. Cool. Reeves rolled her shoulders. The kind of loose, preparatory movement that athletes across 1,000 worlds performed before competition. We doing this, or are we going to talk about it until my grandkids enroll? Thexriel leaned toward Krelvax, mandibles clicking softly. Is insubordination typical of her species? Apparently. Krelvax gestured toward Vexthor in the observation deck. Cadet, you may begin when ready. Standard assessment protocol. Vexthor took his position at the firing station, a raised platform that gave him clear line of sight to the target zone. The scanner bolt launcher felt comfortable in his primary gripping appendages, its weight familiar, its function absolute. He'd fired this weapon so many times, he could calculate trajectory in his sleep. The human stood in the center of the chamber, hands at her sides, looking for all the world like someone waiting for a transport that was running late. Assessment Protocol 774, Vexthor announced, his voice carrying through the chamber's audio system. Single target tracking, moderate velocity, standard thermal lock. Firing in 3, 2, 1. The scanner bolt erupted from the launcher with a sharp crack of displaced air, a sleek projectile about the size of a human finger that glowed with the faint blue luminescence of its tracking system. The moment it left the barrel, it locked onto Reeves's thermal signature, its internal gyroscopes making microscopic adjustments to account for her position, the ambient temperature, and the 17 other variables that made it nearly impossible to dodge. Vexithor had seen this scenario play out 43 times. The target would begin to move, usually diving to the left or right, and the bolt would adjust its trajectory with mechanical precision. Impact occurred, on average, 2.3 seconds after firing. The Zentari held the record for longest evasion at 4.8 seconds, and they could literally shift their molecular structure. This time, though, something happened that wasn't in any of the 1,700 years of recorded assessments. Reeves's hand came up, not in a desperate block, not in a protective flinch, but with the casual, economical motion of someone plucking a piece of fruit from a tree. And she caught the scanner bolt mid-flight. Just caught it. Her fingers closed around the projectile approximately 30 centimeters from her face, stopping its forward momentum as if she'd been expecting it to arrive. Precisely there, and was mildly annoyed that it was late. The chamber went silent, in the way that spaces go silent when the laws of physics have taken a personal day without filing the proper paperwork. Vex Thor's sensory stalks went rigid. His mandibles hung open in a configuration that his species usually reserved for witnessing religious revelations or catastrophic equipment failures. In the observation deck, Krelvax dropped his data tablet. It clattered against the deck plating with a sound that seemed obscenely loud in the absolute silence. Reeves looked at the scanner bolt in her hand, turning it over like she was inspecting a particularly unimpressive coin. The projectile's tracking system flickered confused blue patterns, trying to reconcile the fact that it had reached its target's thermal signature, but had somehow failed to deliver kinetic impact. Then she looked up at Vex Thor, and she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that humans wore when they were about to say something that would haunt you during the quiet moments before sleep. "Earthborn," she said, tossing the scanner bolt from one hand to the other with the casual disregard of someone juggling car keys. "Try again." The chamber remained silent for approximately 3 more seconds before chaos erupted in the form of very professional, very military Vrelian panic. "Malfunction!" Krelvax's voice cracked through the speakers. "Equipment malfunction. Cease assessment. Cadet, Vex Thor, do not—" "It's not a malfunction," Thexeril said, staring at his own tactical readouts with the expression of someone watching their entire worldview undergo hostile deconstruction. "The bolt functioned perfectly. Thermal lock achieved. Trajectory calculations optimal. Velocity within standard parameters. She just—" "That's impossible," Krelvax said flatly. In the chamber, Reeves held up the scanner bolt between thumb and forefinger. "You want this back, or should I keep it as a souvenir?" Vex Thor descended from the firing station, his movements stiff with the kind of confusion that came from having the fundamental certainties of your existence challenged before lunch. He approached Reeves with the caution usually reserved for unexploded ordnance or experimental reactor cores. "How?" he said, because his training had not prepared him for this scenario, and single-word questions were all his cognitive systems could manage. "How what?" Reeves asked, dropping the scanner bolt into his outstretched appendage. "How did you—" "The scanner bolt tracks thermal signatures. It adjusts for movement. The reaction time required to intercept would be—" "Yeah, it's pretty fast," Reeves agreed. "I mean, not crazy fast. I've caught faster." "Faster?" "My brother used to pitch in the semi-pro leagues back on Earth. Threw a ball at about 45 meters per second, and that's without any fancy tracking system. You just kind of watch where it's going and put your hand there." She demonstrated with an easy, fluid motion that made Vex Thor's sensory stalks recoil. "Reflexes. You know, reflexes?" "I know reflexes," Vex Thor said stiffly. "Vrelian reaction times are among the fastest in the Empire. But the scanner bolt is basically the same principle as catching a baseball, except the baseball doesn't glow blue and tell you exactly where it's going." Reeves stretched her arms above her head, joints popping in a way that made several observers wince. "Look, you want to try again? Maybe dial up the difficulty? Because if this is your big, scary assessment, I'm thinking maybe Vrelian military standards need some updating. In the observation deck, Krelvax's mandibles clicked a rapid staccato that his species usually reserved for extreme stress or impending cardiac events. This is not possible. The assessment has been standardized across 47 star systems. 312 species have submitted to scanner bolt testing. None, and I mean categorically none, have ever caught the projectile. The Zentari dodge it, Thexril offered weakly. The Zentari phase through solid matter. They're not catching it. They're ceasing to exist in the same dimensional plane. That's completely different from just... Krelvax gestured helplessly at the chamber below, where Reeves was doing what appeared to be warm-up exercises. Perhaps we should run a diagnostic on the launcher, Thexril suggested. Fine, excellent. Run every diagnostic we have. In the meantime, Krelvax activated the chamber comms. Cadet Vexthor, prepare for secondary assessment. Increased velocity, randomized firing pattern. If the human wishes to dial up the difficulty, we shall oblige her. Vexthor returned to the firing station, his confidence somewhat restored by the weight of protocol and superior orders. So she'd caught one bolt. Probably luck. Possibly some kind of human genetic anomaly that would be noted in her file and promptly dismissed as irrelevant. The scanner bolt launcher had multiple difficulty settings for a reason. He set the parameters to level 4, which was typically reserved for advanced cadets with multiple years of training. The velocity increased by 40%, and the launcher would fire from randomized angles using the chamber's automated turret systems. Level 4 assessment protocol, Vexthor announced. Multiple vectors, increased velocity, randomized timing. Candidate Reeves, acknowledge. Reeves gave him a thumbs up, a human gesture that the Vrelian cultural database unhelpfully translated as affirmation or possible threat display. Firing in 3, 2, 1. The first bolt came from directly ahead, faster than before. Its blue glow leaving tracer patterns in the air. Reeves sidestepped it with a casual economy of motion, the projectile missing her by centimeters before detonating harmlessly against the chamber's shielding. The second bolt came from her left flank, fired from a turret she hadn't been watching. She ducked under it without looking, her attention still fixed on Vexthor's position. The third bolt came from above, descending at a 45-degree angle that should have been impossible to track. Reeves reached up and swatted it aside with her palm, redirecting its trajectory into the wall. "Okay, now we're getting somewhere," she called out. And was that amusement in her voice? "But you're still being too predictable. Mix up the timing more." Predictable. She'd called Vrelian military assessment protocols predictable. Vexthor's mandibles set in a hard line. He adjusted the parameters to level 6, which was reserved for special forces candidates and generally considered borderline excessive. The launcher's automated systems would fire up to 8 bolts in rapid succession, from multiple angles, at velocities that would cause serious injury even to armored targets. "Level 6 protocol," he announced, his voice tight. "Multiple simultaneous projectiles. This is your final warning, Candidate Reeves. Protocol recommends full defensive posture." Sure, Reeves said, still with that infuriating casualness. "Light me up." The chamber erupted with scanner bolts. 8 of them fired within a 2-second window from different angles and elevations. The air filled with blue tracer light and the sharp crack of displaced atmosphere. Reeves moved. Not the panicked scrambling of a target under fire, but the fluid, efficient motion of someone who'd been trained to do exactly this under considerably worse conditions. She caught the first bolt with her right hand, dodged the second with a twist of her torso, caught the third with her left hand and used the fourth bolt's momentum to deflect it into the fifth. The sixth she ducked. The seventh she jumped over. Actually jumped over, because apparently humans could do that. And the eighth she caught again with her right hand while she was still airborne. She landed in a crouch, holding two scanner bolts like they were particularly exciting prizes from an arcade, and looked up at Vex Thor with an expression that could only be described as disappointed. "That's it?" she asked. "That's level 6? In the observation deck, Krelvax made a sound that the Vrelian language had no proper word for, though it roughly translated to, "the noise one's world-view makes when collapsing." "This isn't possible," he said again, because repetition was comforting when reality stopped making sense. The Human Physiological Database indicates reaction times of approximately 200 milliseconds for visual stimuli. The scanner bolts were traveling at velocities that required response times under 70 milliseconds. "The database is clearly incomplete," Thexril said, watching the playback footage with the fascinated horror of someone discovering that everything they knew was wrong. "Look at her movement patterns. She's not reacting to the bolts after they fire. She's reading the firing angles from the turret positioning and anticipating trajectory before launch. That would require spatial awareness and processing capacity far beyond what we thought humans possessed, yes." Thexril zoomed in on Reeves's face during the assault. "She's not even breathing hard." In the chamber, Reeves walked over to the observation deck's communications panel and tapped it with one of the scanner bolts. "So, are we done here? Or do you have like a level 10 that's actually challenging? Because I'm supposed to have a tactical theory exam in an hour, and I really need to study since I'm pretty sure I'm failing that class." Vex Thor climbed down from the firing station with the mechanical movements of someone whose sense of professional pride had just been fed through an industrial shredder. He approached Reeves, this tiny human who had just invalidated 17 centuries of military assessment protocol, and attempted to salvage some dignity from the situation. "Candidate Reeves," he said formally, "your performance is unprecedented. However, the scanner bolt assessment is but one component of comprehensive combat evaluation. Theoretical knowledge, tactical planning, and... Oh, I'm terrible at those," Reeves interrupted cheerfully. "Seriously, ask me to explain the Vrelian fleet formation doctrine, and I'll probably just draw stick figures fighting. But this?" She held up the scanner bolts. "This is just reflexes and spatial awareness. We've got sports back on Earth that are way harder than this. You ever heard of cricket? Because I don't understand cricket, and that's supposedly just hitting a ball with a stick. But somehow it's more complicated than your entire assessment protocol." "Cricket," Vex Thor repeated flatly. "Or baseball, or hockey. Or that thing where people throw axes at targets while drunk. Humans have been throwing things at each other and trying not to get hit for basically our entire history. It's like our main thing." Reeves handed him the scanner bolts. "Don't get me wrong, this is cool tech, very impressive. But you're testing for reaction time and spatial awareness, and humans have been optimizing for those specific traits since before we invented the wheel." "Why?" Vex Thor asked, because it seemed important. "Why would a species dedicate such developmental resources to avoiding thrown objects?" "Because at some point in human evolution, something decided we looked tasty, and we couldn't outrun it or outfight it. So we got really, really good at not being where the teeth were going to be." Reeves shrugged. "Plus, we invented sports where we throw balls at each other's heads. For fun. While people watch and eat fried food, evolution's weird like that." Krelvax's voice crackled through the speakers, sounding like a Vrelian who just discovered his entire career might need re-evaluation. Candidate Reeves, report to Debriefing Chamber 7 immediately. Cadet Vexthor, you are dismissed. We will reconvene to discuss assessment protocol modifications. Modifications. Thexril muttered, scrolling through the data. We're going to need an entirely new evaluation system. The scanner bolt has been our primary combat readiness indicator for 3 centuries. Perhaps, Krelvax said slowly, watching Reeves exit the chamber with the easy confidence of someone who'd just broken a galactic record and was completely unbothered by it. Perhaps our assessment protocols have been optimized for the wrong variables. Over the next 6 hours, Station Kepler 9 underwent what military historians would later call a comprehensive institutional recalibration event, which was Vrelian bureaucratic language for everyone panicked and reconsidered everything. The debriefing stretched into the evening cycle as various department heads attempted to understand exactly what they'd witnessed. Reeves sat through it with patience that bordered on heroic, answering the same questions repeatedly while Vrelian officers struggled to reconcile her performance with their understanding of human limitations. But the medical database indicates human bone density is significantly lower than Vrelian standards, one physiologist insisted, displaying holographic comparisons. The impact force from catching a scanner bolt should have fractured multiple phalanges. I mean, I've broken fingers before, Reeves admitted. You learn to catch with the proper technique. Absorb the impact, move with the momentum, don't fight it directly. Same principle as martial arts falls. Martial arts, the physiologist repeated, making notes that would eventually result in a complete revision of the human capability assessment. Combat training methodology that humans developed over several millennia, explained Lieutenant Thexril, who'd been assigned as the primary cultural liaison and was rapidly developing respect for humanity's apparently pathological dedication to hitting each other creatively. Their historical records indicate thousands of distinct fighting systems, most developed independently across their homeworld. Why so many? Surely one effective combat system would suffice. Humans appear to enjoy variety in their methods of violence, Thexril said diplomatically. Also, they hold competitions to determine which system is superior, then develop new systems based on those results. It's remarkably iterative. The tactical analysis team was having an even more interesting time. They'd brought in combat footage from Earth's various military conflicts, sports competitions, and something called action movies that appeared to be fictional but contained disturbingly accurate depictions of human physical capabilities. They trained children to do this, one analyst said, displaying footage of a youth baseball game. Observe, a juvenile human, approximately 12 standard years, tracking and intercepting a projectile thrown by another juvenile at velocities approaching 30 meters per second, with casual proficiency. It's a recreational activity, another analyst added, sounding slightly traumatized. They do this for entertainment. Millions of humans participate in projectile catching sports annually. And this doesn't seem excessive to them. Apparently not. Their cultural database suggests they consider it normal childhood development. Back in the main debriefing chamber, Krelvax was attempting to salvage some useful data from this disaster of assumptions. Candidate Reeves, in your professional assessment, what would constitute an appropriate difficulty level for combat readiness evaluation of human personnel? Reeves considered this carefully, her expression thoughtful. Honestly, if you want to test actual combat readiness, the scanner bolt thing is kind of backwards. Explain. You're testing whether someone can dodge or catch a projectile in a controlled environment with no actual consequences and perfect visibility. That's testing reflexes, sure, but it's not testing decision-making under pressure, tactical awareness, or ability to function when things go sideways. She leaned forward, warming to her subject. Like, I caught your scanner bolts because I could see them coming, tracked their trajectory, and had time to respond. In actual combat, I'd be dealing with cover, multiple targets, environmental hazards, friendly fire concerns, and complete information uncertainty. The bolt catching is the easy part. The easy part. Yeah. The hard part is deciding whether to engage, retreat, or hold position when you've got incomplete intelligence, a compromised supply line, and a commanding officer who might be making decisions based on outdated information. Reeves shrugged. But you can't really test for that in a simulation. It requires actual experience under actual pressure. The Vrelian officers exchanged glances that conveyed entire conversations worth of, are we going to ignore that this human just identified fundamental flaws in our entire evaluation system? Your insights are valuable, Krelvax admitted grudgingly, though I note that your theoretical examination scores remain concerningly low. Oh, definitely, Reeves agreed without embarrassment. I can't remember half of your fleet formation designations. And your tactical doctrine reads like someone translated it through 6 different languages and then made it intentionally boring. But that's memorization, not competence. Military operations require adherence to established doctrine. Right up until the moment they require improvisation because the situation doesn't match the doctrine, Reeves interrupted. Which, according to your own historical records, happens in approximately 60% of engagements. But sure, let's focus on making sure everyone can recite the manual, instead of teaching them how to adapt when the manual stops being relevant. Thexril made a sound that might have been a laugh or possibly a cough. She's not wrong about the adaptation statistics. She's also not supposed to say it out loud during official debriefing, Krelvax said, but his mandibles quirked in what might have been amusement. Very well, Candidate Reeves. Your assessment results will be noted as exceptional with significant caveats. You will continue in the exchange program, and we will develop supplementary evaluation protocols for human exchange candidates. Meaning we need to completely redesign our testing procedures because one human broke 17 centuries of military tradition before lunch, and we're trying to maintain some dignity about it, Thexril translated. Pretty much, Krelvax admitted. Dismissed, Candidate. And please, for my personal well-being, try not to break anything else this week. Reeves left the debriefing chamber and nearly walked into Cadet Vexthor, who'd apparently been waiting in the corridor. His sensory stalk swiveled toward her with an expression she was learning to read as determined professionalism over personal confusion. Candidate Reeves, he said formally, I wish to speak with you regarding today's assessment. Look, I'm sorry if I embarrassed you, Reeves said, because she wasn't actually trying to humiliate anyone. That wasn't the goal. You demonstrated capabilities that exceeded all projections and invalidated my assumptions about human limitations. Vexthor interrupted. This is not embarrassment. This is recalibration. He paused, mandibles working as he chose his words carefully. I would like to request additional training sessions to better understand human combat methodology, if you are willing. Reeves blinked. You want me to train you? I want to learn from you, Vexthor corrected. There is a difference. I am skilled in Vrelian combat doctrine, which is clearly optimized for Vrelian physiology and tactical philosophy. You operate from an entirely different framework, and I suspect understanding that framework would make me a more effective officer. Huh. Reeves considered this. Yeah, okay. But fair warning, human combat training involves a lot of getting hit, falling down, and general discomfort. We sort of embrace the suck as part of the learning process. I believe I can adapt, Vexthor said with the confidence of someone who had no idea what he was agreeing to. Cool. Also, you need to help me pass tactical theory, because I'm pretty sure I'm going to fail that exam, and that would be really embarrassing after today. That can be arranged. Vexthor's mandibles formed what his species considered a smile, though it looked more like a grimace to human eyes. Though, I confess curiosity. You can catch scanner bolts mid-flight, but struggle with theoretical examinations. Different skill sets, Reeves explained. Catching things requires reflexes and spatial awareness. Tests require sitting still and remembering boring information. Sitting still is actually harder for me than the catching things part. They walked together through the station's corridors, an unlikely pair that would become increasingly common over the following months as Station Kepler 9 underwent its institutional identity crisis. Behind them, in archives and administrative offices, Vrelian officers were beginning the long process of documenting this day's events and their implications. The official report, filed under Assessment Protocol Revision Recommendations, ran to 347 pages and included the following summary. Human exchange candidate demonstrated capabilities significantly exceeding projected parameters during standard scanner bolt assessment. Current testing protocols inadequate for accurate evaluation of human combat potential. Recommend complete overhaul of assessment systems for Terran personnel and possibly other high-reflex capacity species. The unofficial report, shared over drinks in the officers' lounge, was considerably shorter. Human caught the damn bolt, like just reached up and grabbed it with her hand. What the hell? 3 weeks later, the Vrelian Military Academy implemented Assessment Protocol Modification 977, the Human Exception Clause. It acknowledged that certain species, due to evolutionary pressures involving predator evasion and recreational violence, possessed capabilities that rendered traditional scanner bolt testing ineffective. 6 months after that, Reeves graduated with acceptable theoretical scores, exceptional practical ratings, and a reputation that made her both the Academy's most impressive success story and its most frustrating case study. 1 year later, she returned to Earth, where her training supervisor asked the standard debriefing question. How did the exchange program go? Pretty good, Reeves said, though I think I might have accidentally broken their entire assessment system. How? Caught a smart bullet. Is that a euphemism? Nope. Literal smart bullet. They didn't think humans could do that. Her supervisor considered this. To be fair, that's a pretty reasonable assumption. Most species can't. Yeah, but most species didn't spend 10,000 years playing dodgeball and calling it character building. Reeves grinned. Turns out that when you optimize your entire evolutionary history for not dying to things that want to eat you, you get pretty good at not being where fast objects are going to be. That's actually kind of terrifying from an external perspective. Right? Imagine being an alien and discovering that humans consider catching deadly projectiles to be basic recreational activity. No wonder they were confused. Back on Station Kepler 9, Cadet Vexthor filed his final report on cross-species training methodologies. The conclusion read, "Human combat philosophy appears based on assumption that if you survive enough punishment during training, actual combat will seem relatively manageable by comparison. This approach is insane. It is also disturbingly effective. Recommend further study from safe distance with medical personnel standing by. Chief Assessor Krelvax, for his part, eventually saw the humor in the situation. His updated assessment manual included an entire chapter on accommodating anomalous species capabilities, and featured, as its opening example, the day a human caught a scanner bolt and asked them to try again. The phrase Earthborn, try again, entered Vrelian military slang as an expression meaning, you have severely underestimated your opponent. It was considered both an insult and a warning, depending on context. And somewhere in the Vrelian military archives, filed under significant tactical paradigm shifts, a note read simply, humans can catch bullets. Adjust strategies accordingly. Also, never let them explain cricket. It only raises more questions. The galaxy, it turned out, was full of surprises. Some of them came in the form of highly advanced technology, others in the form of first contact with exotic civilizations, and some in the form of compact bipeds who'd spent their entire evolutionary history preparing to not get eaten and had developed really good reflexes as a result. The Vrelian Empire adapted, as empires do when confronted with information that challenges their worldview. They revised their protocols, updated their databases, and learned to account for the fact that some species approached combat from frameworks so fundamentally different that standard assumptions became actively misleading. But deep down, in the private thoughts of officers who'd witnessed that day in the assessment chamber, one question remained unanswered and possibly unanswerable. If catching the scanner bolt was considered the easy part, what exactly were humans capable of when things got difficult? Most decided they were happier not knowing. Some questions, after all, were better left to theoretical speculation and worst-case scenario planning. And on Earth, humans continued throwing objects at each other's heads for fun, completely unaware that they'd caused an institutional crisis 47 light-years away, which was probably for the best.